There's much more to this story than I initially imagined. Originally, I just thought it was a screw up, but it seems like the banks in this story had some sort of a cahoots, which fell apart, which I'm going to talk in today's video. Essentially, it's like the prisoner dilemma. They had a settlement, and somebody decided to get greedy and screwed everybody else. It's a crazy, crazy story. The SEC definitely are asleep at the wheel for this. Today's video is going to be epic. So hold on tight. We're going to come out strong today, giving you some view over here. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, I am still on vacation. I'm still stranded without electricity, without running water. I'm just running on fumes, but I'm here from my campsite in my vehicle bringing you some bangers. So it seems that the whole Archegos Meltdown is much worse than I initially imagined. And trust me, I have a wild imagination and I was imagining some horrible stuff. But it seems the situation is much, much worse.
So one of the most interesting things is how Archegos was using derivatives to basically build exposure to, it looks like a bunch of single stock names. It was using total return swaps, contracts for difference that allowed it to make these big leverage bets on the direction of a stock. But of course, when the stock starts going the wrong way, it all sort of collapses and there are margin calls and ultimately its prime brokers get affected. So you could see possibly the SEC taking an interest in the derivative strategy, taking an interest in the fact that a fund would be able to build up huge exposure that no one knows about through derivatives. If a fund buys an actual stock, it usually has to file ownership, and that shows up somewhere. In the case of derivatives, it seems people don't really know about it. And the other thing of interest for regulators is going to be the involvement of the prime brokers, of course. Is it normal to have 6 or 7 prime brokers providing you massive amounts of financing and leverage and seemingly not knowing what you're actually doing with that financing? You had a bunch of banks get together and try to eke out an agreement to basically limit their losses. They were supposed to all agree not to sell or to try to hold over on selling and work out some way of disposing of the collateral in a way that would minimize losses for everyone. That doesn't seem to have happened. Instead, we had 1 or 2 banks that rushed to get out ahead of everyone else. There are also shades of Lehman Brothers to this, and I don't mean to imply that it's as systemic as an issue as Lehman Brothers, because it's not. But if you remember, Lehman Brothers used Repo 105 to conceal the true financial health of its balance sheet. You can kind of see a parallel here in the way Archegos was using derivatives to conceal its stakes, deliberately or not so deliberately. And then the final parallel here has to be with GameStop, right? We saw a bunch of retail investors pile into single stocks using a type of derivative, options contracts, to try to move the underlying price by getting a bunch of dealers to hedge out their exposure. And it seems that Archegos was doing something similar. It had big exposures to single stocks. It seems like its derivative strategy might have driven the price up. And then when things started to go wrong, it also fueled the downward movement in the price. And if you think that regulators were taking a look at GameStop, taking a look at how hedge funds were involved in that whole saga, you can bet they're going to be taking a similar look at what Archegos was doing.
So we have Archegos Capital placing insanely huge bets on specific companies, using other people's money, essentially using a lot of margin. Also using swaps and other derivatives so they don't have to report none of this to any freaking body. And now here's the kicker that we just saw in this video. Essentially, the banks knew they screwed up and they had a plan. Essentially, slowly liquidate stuff so nobody gets stuck holding the bag.
So late last week, various prime brokerage departments started working with Archegos Capital to try and help them out from some of these positions, but it didn't last very long, as quite quickly one of the prime brokerage's units started making margin calls. That's likely late Thursday night based on my conversations, and the others were all forced to follow fairly quickly. Various conversations with sources at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley confirmed that while they had large exposure, $10 to $15 billion respectively, they've managed to offload those positions without any serious losses. This means the bulk of the losses on the bank side appear to be falling on Credit Suisse and Nomura, both of whom have warned on the record about the situation, though the size of the loss is still to be confirmed. It is expected to be in the billions, And it comes at a particularly tough time, by the way, for Credit Suisse following recent exposure to the Greensill Capital scandal as well. Share prices for the group highlighting that expected level of exposure. Credit Suisse and Nomura down a lot. The others not down so much. And also, I think, importantly, off their lows as all of us and our peers have been reporting these sorts of stories. And the thing I'd just end with, guys, is quite the level of risk that has been taken. On the hedge fund side, we're talking a stock, for example, if we focus on Viacom CBS, that was up 9x. It was up at least double since the crazy GameStop madness. So at whatever point this hedge fund wanted to get in and get exposure, you wonder, why not start to take some profits and not be squeezed as they were once the company did a secondary listing, which one expects is probably one of the triggers that started causing problems for this last week. And on the other side, on the prime brokerage side, and this is probably more focused to the Credit Suisses and Nomuras of this world, if they're the ones that are going to end up facing billions of losses, what exactly are you taking that much risk for? Because an annual fee, at best, for a hedge fund of this style, for prime brokerage units, it's going to be in the tens of millions of dollars. It's not going to be hundreds. And you're taking risk to the downside of many multiples of that. It just seems very, very imbalanced, I guess.
Essentially, what you have here is a bunch of banks that let some dude run crazy with their money. Now they understand they freaked up, and now they're trying to cover their tracks. Essentially saying, well, why don't all of us slowly liquidate their positions so nobody dumps a lot of stock right at once and screws everybody else? Let's just sell it slowly over the course of the next few weeks, few months, whatever. And then everybody says, yeah, sure, let's do it. Nobody's going to get screwed like this. Nobody will ever find out that we were reckless, irresponsible, and just did some craziness that we should not have done. Now, here's what actually happened. Morgan Stanley walked out of that meeting, as well as some other participants, and essentially said, screw you guys, we're going to dump everything, and we're going to leave you holding the bag. And essentially, that is exactly what happened. Ending with a massive, massive sell-off, sending prices extremely down, and leaving all the other bags, or should I say banks, holding the bags. Now, at this point, the SEC have to make some noise as if they give a shit, which I'm sure they don't, and they actually start investigating this. Oh my God. Now, I'm not saying the banks are not evil. I'm just saying, where the hell were you, SEC? You're letting this thing happen under your nose, using swaps, using derivatives. You're letting this run wild. You know this is going on. And now, instead of saying, well, we should have been better at supervising this, you're going to say, well, the evil banks did it, and that's going to be the end of it. I think the SEC fell asleep at the wheel. They let a teenage drunk driver, which is the banks, drive this automobile into the ocean, and now they're going to say, well, the driver did it. I don't think that's the case. I think that's a systemic problem that needs addressing. My opinion, let me know below what you guys think. I'll see you when I get off this mountain.